Welcome to Wild Turkey Science, a podcast made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow. I'm Dr. Marcus Lashley, Professor of Wildlife Ecology at the University of Florida.
And I'm Dr. Will Goolsby, Professor of Wildlife Ecology and Management at Auburn University. We're both lifelong hunters and devoted scientists who are passionate about hunting, managing, and researching wild turkeys.
In this podcast, we'll explore turkey research, speak to the experts in the field, and address the difficult questions related to wild turkey ecology and management.
Our goal
is to serve as your connection to wild turkey science.
Yeah. Well, we had like another hour's worth of content, didn't we?
Yeah.
So we'll just keep going with that. And, while we were getting ready for this, we were kind of having a conversation about, what it is we want to talk about exactly today. And the way that I framed it was that Marcus and I are most familiar with turkey behavior by looking at dots on a map. And what I'm referring to there is GPS locations. And so one of the things that we're really excited about, and, we just recently talked to some other animal behaviorists that have directly observed turkeys for various experiments. And then today we have on turkey royalty, right? Miss Tes Jolly is in the house. She's actually in my office. Those of you that watch regularly probably recognize that. We tried to sit across the desk from each other, but Tess lives just down the road from Auburn, so she was able to make it up, and we were hoping to sit across the desk from each other, but there was just too much echo. So we came up with this alternative situation.
I'm pretty impressed, Tess, that you were able to just walk into Auburn and push Will out of his office.
I know. But he's not letting me put my name up, though.
Even your panel is still named Goolsby.
Yeah. Well, I like to be close to the turkeys, and this is just fine with this big fella behind me.
If today does not demystify your perception of me, I don't know what will, because
see how the sausage is made.
Yes.
It's an honor to be here, guys. I really happy to be here and love all the work that you all are doing. I learned so much from your podcast.
Well, it's really special to have you here too, and talking to you at times in the past, and then talking to similar folks who have just spent hours and hours and hours just watching, observing, and learning from turkeys. Marcus can tell you that it stimulates ideas for us that drive our research.
Absolutely.
So I mean, those observations and the ideas that are stimulated from them can sometimes be really invaluable.
Yeah, there's no question about that. And it's also inspiring me. Like I was just telling you, I was out in the field this morning. I'm, actively trying to be a part of the field operations on our turkey project, and we have some observational stuff going on. And I'm trying to take after you and spend some time with the birds. And when they're not going to die at the end of it, I guess I get to see the whole thing play out instead of ending it during the middle of the show.
Yeah, that's the beauty of photography. It's the same as hunting. You're just recycled hunting. You got a trigger on your camera, and I say boom a lot of times if it's a really nice bird, but might get another chance at him. I'm recycling him.
Release.
Yeah. It's boom and release.
I know for me, that was I've never really done it with turkeys, but when I started hunting properties that were managed for older age class deer, and especially when I combine that with bow hunting, I feel like that is when my number of observations and my knowledge about whitetail behavior, from actually physically observing the animals, really began to grow. So I could definitely see how that'd be the case, photographing turkeys too.
Yeah. When you let it just play out, especially if you're not calling to them, because I don't call to them a lot unless I feel like I need to, or I want to make them react in a certain way, or if there's nothing happening, I'm cold calling like I would on a turkey hunt and all. But you get to see what happens, like if somebody has a decoy out or there's an interaction going on with a hen or some jakes, if you shoot the bird, you don't know what plays out. And decoys, whether you're a fan or not, I don't use them photographing much, but I do like to get the reactions because it is a legal method of hunting, and I like to see some of the other behavior, leading up to coming to a decoy where they think they're coming to a hen and all. But um, I've seen longbeards stay with a decoy until dark and be
Yeah.
so zoned in they didn't even see my husband drive up this. And we don't. I don't photograph in the backyard. This is all out on the farm in the wild. But I had a longbeard that was so zoned into that decoy that I was texting my husband. I said, just ease on down here. It was a 300-yard long food plot, and that bird ignored that silver truck,
The silver
until he
predator.
was until he was right up there about 40 yards away, and I've got Jolly in the truck and the gobbler with the hen and me in the blind all lined up, and it took him about a minute before he finally looked
I bet.
around. But turkeys can get in a zone. There's no doubt
Mm-hmm.
about that. When
And
they're
didn't you say that you've told me that story before, and if I recall right, it was after fly up time.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've
told
seen that
me.
a number of times with decoys. They'll peck the eye out. They really go for the eyeball, and these really realistic ones like the DSD hen that I
Mhm.
use, they paint them and they've got the catch light in that eye. And I mean, the hens will do the same thing. You get a boss hen, and she will stay there and get on that hen decoy, and that's usually a little later in the season. I usually don't throw a decoy out there until the hens are already have laid
Mm-hmm.
their nest, their clutch, and they're starting to incubate. And you've got those gobblers that are lonesome and they're out hanging around in the afternoons near where the hens are nesting, and
Just
I can
looking for
throw
some
a
trouble to get
yeah,
into.
yeah, and I can put a squatting hen down and a jake decoy, and they don't like it. And
Yeah.
you can, the hens will do the same thing. They're territorial, and they go for the eye, boy. It's
Well,
amazing.
you kind of inspired a question from me related to that. You were saying you wanted to see the how behavior of them approaching
Hmm.
a decoy compared, I guess, to just an uninhibited, unfeathered behavior. Are there any differences other than that's a pretty obvious one where they're sticking around even after fly up with it? Or are there other things that you've picked up on over the
Yeah.
years that differ about how they interact with a decoy versus when they're just interacting with each other?
I don't know if there's another term for it, but I call it high heading. And this is usually with live hens when they're approaching, and I might not see them, but I've seen it. I see it in jakes too, and I see it in hens. But it's a dominance behavior where
Mm,
they point their beak as high, and the gobblers will stand up taller, and
Mm.
their shoulder. I call it the shoulder pads. Their feathers on the butt of the wing will stand up, and that's I see that a lot in during these dominance displays when they
yeah,
do the high head, and you can tell if there's just one bird in the field, which I've seen it a lot, and all of a sudden his tail will bounce. I've seen the
yeah,
gobbler's
I've seen
tail
that.
bounce and the feathers come up and the head come up, and at times they'll do a whine, and usually there's either a pack of bull jakes coming or there's a couple of other dominant birds coming. But that's a signal that a hunter can use, when they're hunting, is watch how those birds behave, because you may
Mm,
not see it, but there's something getting ready to happen. So, it can really help you if you're hunting. But they do
yeah,
give you a lot of clues. Uh,
yeah. So when you're saying high heading, do you mean the beak is literally like pointed straight
Yeah,
up?
they point it up and they'll stand really
Oh,
tall. I mean, I've got a lot of photos of that. And the hens will
yeah.
do that as a dominance posture. They'll flare their tail, they'll go into a strut. I mean, I've
Mm-hmm.
photographed hens strutting,
Mm-hmm.
and that's usually your boss hen. I mean, she's herding the other girls around within the flock and all, but uh, yeah, the behaviors right now, the hens are fighting among themselves. Some they're settling down a little bit on our place, but when you get a couple of gobblers strutting and the hens start fighting, the hen it's I see it all the time. The hen that's getting chased will run in and around those strutters and do like little figure eights trying to lose those other hens. It's really if you've never seen it, it's pretty comical. She'll duck
Mm.
underneath and kind of get out of the way so they can't see her. So
Mm-hmm.
but and just little things like when the birds are going to leave the field, like if you're not sure whether that bird is gonna has busted you or is getting ready to leave, they'll usually check their wings. Most turkey hunters know when a bird brings his wings up a little bit. Not necessarily the wing stretch, but they'll do a wing stretch when they're getting ready to leave the field, whether they're scared or not. But that little wing check means he's fixing to turn. Usually, I mean, I don't say always or never with turkeys because they'll make a liar out of you.
Hmm.
There's no absolutes with them, but um, it's it's pretty interesting to see all the little
Mm-hmm.
behaviors.
Yeah. Tess, you mentioned fighting a couple of times, and one thing I really wanted to ask you about today is kind of when in the year do you see the most intense fighting among gobblers? Because I think we
The-
typically think of that occurring during the hunting season, but
Yeah.
I've also heard that it could happen well before that.
And I
yeah, I mean,
I kind of had a similar question when you were talking about the hens trying to lose each other. When it was similar. I
y-
wanted to know, when are you seeing that happening during the year or two?
the for Will's question, the just from being out there and watching him over a lot of years, um, the the most vicious fights that I've seen and photographed where they really were trying to hurt each other was between two mature gobblers when the hens are on the nest, but they still
Mm,
want to breed. They've still
Mm-hmm.
got that testosterone up. They've got that urge, and it's usually at our place in East Central Alabama. That's third week of April.
hmm.
Those gobblers are moving. They're looking for hens that are popping out to dust in the afternoons and peck a little bit. And, you know, I have the luxury of photographing some of the same birds year to year because we don't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily hunt them on our place. So I can see a bird like Loverboy. That was a bird I photographed for 6 years, and
Wow.
he taught me more about spring. I didn't shoot him much any other time, but from February to the end of middle of May. But there's just the fighting. Those old birds. I had a fight that lasted 24 minutes. I timed it, and those two birds really wanted to kill each other, and
Wow.
they did a lot of the beak stabbing down the throat and all.
Hmm.
Usually the fights now are groups. It's just a melee.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a barnyard brawl. But when you get two mature birds that square off, and they approach each other like a prize fighter. They mantle those wings like a hawk would, and they make themselves really big. And when they start going with the spurs, that one actually you could see a drop of blood on the breast feather. So I know he made contact through all that
Mm-hmm.
breast feathers into the chest on that one. And it was 24 minutes, and their mouths when the what they try to do a lot of the time is bulldog the other bird. When they
Hmm.
really fight, they'll try to twist their necks. And I see them wrap necks, but what they do is they'll get them in a beak lock and then bear down with them and twist them. And if they can get them off balance enough times, usually that one he'll run and fight's over. But yeah, I'd say when the hens are on the nest, that's when I've seen the most vicious fights.
Yeah, that's not what I would have expected you to answer, because
Really?
I would think that they would. Well, I would have just thought, and I'm just going off, of intuition here, but you would think that they would want to kind of sort that dominance out before really the breeding starts. And you're saying it's kind of when the hens are on the nest, but they still have that elevated testosterone, and they're looking for something to do.
Well,
that's really interesting to me.
and I think too, Will, their paths cross at that time of year. You've got a lot of your younger birds have been shot; they're gone. You got your older birds that are seasoned; they've had their routes, but they cover a lot of ground. I know just from listening to the gobbling. There's usually, they'll gobble in the afternoons walking, trying to, they're just out trolling, trying to see if they can find a hen that's lost her nest or, abandoned it or whatever. And that's a happy gobbler in late April or early May that finds a hen that has lost her nest for whatever reason, and she's coming back into the fields and stuff. Boy, he'll get on her and stick with her. And those are some really good opportunities for me for photography, plus to watch the behavior, because you'll have some of those jakes that everybody hates. Nobody wants the jakes around at that point coming in. So you get some really good interaction at that time. So it's like starting spring over again almost. And I see breedings clear up to the end of April. They'll still breed. But they do try to kill each other. I mean, there's some knockdown dragouts.
Yeah. I had a question that came to mind when you were talking through that, and you said you had the one named Loverboy that you filmed for a long time. How do you know that it's the same turkey? Is it like does it have like a unique marking on it, or is it something like, how are you determining?
I could give you a real smart Alec remark, but I won't. No, I learned from photography, when you look at your photos and you're zooming in, I'm always intrigued. I should have, if I could do my life over, I'd be sitting in a desk like you guys. I'd be a wildlife biologist studying turkeys.
I think
I sweat the details. I love the details of learning. I love to learn.
Yeah.
But the crown, the skull cap is what I call it, is just like a fingerprint on us. When you zoom into that skull cap, especially when they're excited, when they're slicked down and they're, not excited, the crown doesn't look like a whole lot. But when it swells, they have a definite signature wrinkles that are there. And I can identify, and Loverboy had a certain wrinkle pattern to his crown. Plus, he had an extended gobble that was just a very signature gobble. I knew that gobble, and he had a very unique brush beard. And he lived, between our property and us, he was the king of spring in that one big field for 6 springs. And the last spring that I saw him, he was at least 3 when I first saw him. Started photographing him. Some jakes came in. He came into the field and he was strutting, and some jakes came in and they started terrorizing him. Well, he whipped them, and he sent them packing. So I got real interested in him. I thought, well, this is a tough bird here, and he ruled the roost there for 6 springs. But the last spring he was old, and he came in trailing 3 mature gobblers. And I used to spend afternoons with him during incubating time. He would come into that field and get under a big red oak and squat in the grass, and he'd put his head up like a periscope watching for the hens. through, in the heat of the day, and I would just purr and cluck and scratch leaves in the blind, and he'd strut around the blind. So we had this relationship, and I was spending every day, some days all day, and Jolly, my husband, would say, you spend more time with that gobbler than you do me. And I said, yeah, he's my lover boy. And that's how he got named. That was the second year. He said, don't you get tired of sitting out there? I said, no. He's just, and it was a very unique, I did a story about it. And I don't think I've ever connected with a wild animal to where I could purr and cluck and he would respond and come, and he thought there was a little shy hen in that blind scratching leaves, and but that was where he hung out and I hung out, and then when the hen came in, he went to her. But it was a neat little distraction for him. He didn't know that it was a distraction, but it was a gift from God from me. It really was. It was practically every day. I mean, I kept a journal, and he was a special bird,
amazing.
real special bird.
Yeah. I did not expect you to tell me that you're looking at their forehead fingerprint.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. They have and their caruncles down below are very unique. We have one right now that's got the left main caruncle is higher than the right, and I don't see that very often. Most of the time, they're in a definite configuration, but they're pretty matched, like a couple of big cherries. This one is short on the other side, so he's real easy to identify. The skull cap takes a little bit more. I got to get it on the computer, but they have their personalities too. Believe it or not, y'all probably know that all of all wild animals creatures have some kind of personality. Some are aggressive, some aren't, and all. But some are scarier than others. They run easier, but the hens are a little bit harder. But I've even looked at the barring on the wings and then compared it because that's like a fingerprint as well. I mean, and I even had a gobbler at the farm last year with Osceola barring, and he's very black. That's the first time I've had him with solid black primaries, but this one was just like an Osceola. I haven't seen him this year. He was an old bird. But yeah, each one of them, you can identify them if you can get the photos.
So one of the things that I've been really interested to ask, because these individuals, you're out there so often, and sometimes you're not just watching them every day, but you're watching the same bird year after year. How predictable are they in those circumstances? Like, do they not show up some days and other days they do? Or when they're unmolested and you've got these mature birds, do they generally just kind of roost in the same area and fly down to the same area and have the same daily routine?
Well, I think that all gets worked out during the fall and winter. Is whoever's dominant and can maintain it. I tell people every day is a new day in the turkey woods, because somebody can get their butt whipped. And they're not necessarily on top, but they can fight back to that. So you have the birds that stay dominant every year, like Loverboy did. He was an exception. He was a big, tough bird. And it's like bucks. Some bucks don't even have to fight because the other bucks just know they're tough. They can look at them and tell. But Loverboy had two different roosts. We didn't hunt there, so he was unmolested. He had two of his favorite roosts. One was out of drain in a big grass area. There's a hardwood drain. Another one was right on our property line. And I could bank on him being in one of those two places if he wasn't molested. But, you get a coyote run through, you don't know where your turkeys are going to be. Or a bobcat climb a tree. That's why there's just no absolutes. But yeah, these birds, if they're not hunted and scared, they tend to fall into a routine, other than it's really related to the habitat and the food sources and the time of year. That they're going to change according to that. But during the spring, when I do the most of it, they can get in a habit of being in a general area. Nobody's hunting them hard and calling
That
to
makes
them and
sense.
everything. I think they are creatures of habit. They do roam. We all know turkeys cover a lot of land, ground, but if they've got good habitat, which is what, we're all about, is providing everything we can, I think they tend to not travel as much in it. In the winter, we don't have winters like you have up north. They have to go places where there's food. Here, they've got it pretty easy in general. But we didn't have acorns this year. They were gone by the end of November, so our deer and our turkeys had no hard mast. So they've been in the food plots pulling grass,
Yeah.
wheat and that sort of thing, really, really hard this year. And
Yeah.
you could put golf balls on our food plots, and the exclusion rings are up, thigh deep.
Yeah.
So they're a little more predictable. They're not roaming. They're coming to those food plots right now.
Yeah.
The clover's coming up and all that.
I hate to make you tell the same story twice in the same day, but I think you won't mind. But you were telling me earlier, I think it was before we connected with Marcus, about a breeding event that you were able to witness earlier today.
Yeah, it was yesterday morning.
Yesterday, that's right.
This big bird, I call him Big Daddy. He's an old bird. He's got hooks and he's got some.
I love these names.
Yeah, I know. Well, I got to name them. You got to hear some of these. I got Cool Whip too. We'll have.
I heard about Cool Whip when you were on another podcast. How do you know him? Is it based on his forehead or his caruncles or his wing bars?
Yeah, it was his forehead. It looked like a big dollop of Cool Whip melting, and I couldn't get the catch light in his eyes because it hung over his eyes so bad that you couldn't get his eyes.
Well, I haven't heard about Big Daddy, so I'm wondering.
Well, Big Daddy is just a big bird, but he's got a little bit of barring in his center two tail feathers, so he's really easy to identify, and he is the man this year. There's 2 or 3 other longbeards there that are old birds. They've got real curve, but he's got breeding rights right now. Nobody's whipped him off of it, but he bred 2 hens he bred one, and then he just went walking away, and another little hen went right up to him. And what was unique about those 2, usually they have that breeding pose where they kind of go like they're in a trance. The little hen, they'll stand and their head will be down and they'll just be really still, and that gobbler will strut around them and then they'll squat. Well, these 2 hens, the one that was closest to me, she would drop her wings, and I showed the photo to Will. Just her first about 4 or 5 primaries, she would drop down to the ground and stand, and then she'd walk around him and she'd do it again, and she did it 3 times, and then she just slowly lower down. And I hadn't really seen that many times where that rather than doing that pose where they just kind of crouch and look down, she was standing up and she had those wings kind of dropped. And then when he went over to the other hen, she did something different. And I told Will it was such a pretty morning yesterday. The sun was out, and the iridescence on these birds, I really do believe, like you all say, that they choose the best looking gobbler. I mean, I really do think that they're attracted by all that iridescence. And this other hen did little trots around that gobbler, and she would brush against him, his wings, and right underneath his chest. And she made 3 or 4 circles around him, just real tight, and then squatted, and he bred her. Which I thought was, I see that some, but that was really cool to see 2 different ways that the hens kind of made a signal to the gobbler they were ready to breed. So, and the jakes were they went crazy. Jakes you want to observe jakes. You need to come out when that's happening. Oh my gosh. They're like teenage boys.
They just don't know what to do.
They're just watching, and they're like jumping, and like, I know this.
Well, that's really really interesting, and I love hearing you talk about it because clearly you're passionate about it, and you're spent your life engaged, in this kind of behavior. When you were observing that, you were talking about it being sunny and how pretty the birds were and
Mhm.
iridescent. Do you think that they changed their ritual because they were engaged in that more iridescent? I mean, is that what
You
you were
know,
interpreting it
the
as, or
the observation part of it, the nice thing is I've got proof of it because I videoed it.
yeah?
That's and when you go back and look, because I forget a lot. Well, I'm at that age where you can forget what you saw or you can think what you saw, and it wasn't necessarily what you saw.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, videoing it and photographing it makes it better. But when I looked at it, there was more excitement yesterday morning in all the birds. We've had all these heavy, dirty sock, cloudy days, where it's just funky. But yesterday morning, it was just beautiful. You had gorgeous light that hits early before it burns out and gets glaring and all. And those gobblers look their best in that early morning light um, that we all like to photograph in. And there just was more excitement in the whole flock. Um, the hens were chasing each other around. The jakes were all, they do that a lot, but they were really, and then there were two jakes that were strutting. And I was a little surprised that those gobblers let them do that. But it was like everybody wanted to just get
Hmm.
in the program yesterday. And then this morning it was dirty sock, dark again, and there wasn't near the activity,
Mm-hmm.
that I didn't
Mm-hmm.
see any breedings. They just kind of came out there, fed, ran around with the jakes a little bit, but the gobblers just followed the hens, and none of the hens seemed intent on anything other than just feeding and preening. And they spend so much of their time preening. It just
Mm-hmm.
amazes me how much, they've got a lot of work to do every day on
Mm-hmm.
their plumage. Every single day they have to do that. I think if that's one thing they've taught me is just how much time it takes for them to maintain uh, their plumage is what keeps them alive.
Mm-hmm.
They
Right.
it serves so many purposes for it. And those gobblers, you can't get anything any prettier than the iridescence on a sunny morning early. And I
Mm-hmm.
think the hens respond to that. To answer your question, just as an impression, I can't ask them and have them answer, but
Yeah,
it excites me. So I'm a woman, so I figure they are too.
that's funny.
Tess, I'm
Oh.
curious on some of those older dominant birds um, that you've observed kind of being the primary breeders. Have you have you ever noticed they, especially like when they're displaying and on the display grounds, do you notice that they gobble less than some of the other birds, or have you ever noticed a hen being put off by a strutting bird gobbling? Because this is something and I'll give you the context for my question. A couple weeks ago, I was telling you earlier that we had talked to an animal behaviorist, and he had done some research on captive turkeys, looking at all sorts of things like, what is it that hens see in gobblers that lead to them choosing to mate with that gobbler and so on. And that was something that he had noticed with those captive birds. And I wondered if it was maybe just because they were in a more confined space. But he
Mhm.
said that if a gobbler was strutting and the hen was drawn to it, and Marcus, help me out if I miss an aspect of this, but that if that bird then gobbled, that it seemed like the hen kind of found that off-putting.
Hmm.
Have you ever seen like anything like that out in the
Not,
field?
no, not really. In fact, I think that it proves it to me that they're attracted or they answer the call of the gobble at fly down. Like right now,
Mm-hmm.
those gobblers hit the ground first. All of them came down. Jake's right along with them. Then the hens start coming in and they gobble, and there'll be a flurry of hens and they gobble, and there'll be a flurry of hens. And of course, they're doing their cackles and calls. Um, I don't think I've ever noticed where one would, you know,
Mm-hmm.
dodge away from a gobble ever. I would tend to think anytime you crowd something in, in an unnatural space, that might affect them, negatively. But I really think they tend to be. It's an answer to that call. They come to them, and they know exactly how many hens have not flown down. I've seen that 3 mornings in a row at
I'm
the
glad
house.
you brought this up.
There's always a hen up there that's got the biggest mouth. It's the last one to come down. And yesterday and the day before, she stayed up there and she trash talked from the tree after everybody was down. And 3 of the gobblers went up the hill to her area where she was, and she flew down and they escorted her back down 2 mornings in a row. And I'm like, she's just playing hard to get. But she was the most vocal one. And this is just anecdotal. This is what I'm seeing this year. I have a really unique opportunity this year in a new spot, different than where I typically do. So I'm really getting to see the whole flock and be close. I get up in the wee hours to get in there in the dark and get set up and not spook anybody. So they, that's one of the big challenges for me, is to get in and get close enough to where I can really get to see some of that stuff. But they do seem to know, those gobblers in this situation seem to know when the last hen is down, whether she's talking or not. They hung around this morning, and there was still 2 hens that I didn't hear, but they knew were up there. And they didn't move with the flock of hens until those 2 hit the ground, and then they went down. And it's almost like they've got a head count on who's available, and they're going to make sure they're all down and coming before. But to see them go up the hill and then come back down was pretty cool. I thought, man, she's in control.
Makes me wonder how in the world
control.
do I ever kill one?
I know it does, doesn't it?
Well, I was also thinking, maybe you do have a chance when they're henned up too, but if they know that they're looking for 13 hens and you end up being number 14, do they care enough to go back up the hill and get number 14?
Yeah.
Or do they know something's up?
Or do they know something's up? I mean, like I say, people listening to this podcast, I'm not saying that every gobbler is going to do a head count. I just know what happened multiple times and I've seen it before. They kind of hang around where they first fly down, especially if it's in a field situation, which I have that luxury right now. I've got a food plot. They're not flying down in the timber. So I've made a head count of the flock. I know how many are going to be coming in. And those gobblers seem to know too, because they haven't been moving from that where they put their feet on the ground until everybody's down. And then they move, unless it was like that one that was so loud. I mean, she was calling like she was almost like she was either mad or she wasn't spooked. It wasn't that kind of, it was just springtime talk.
It's like she's up
they
there
responded.
Yeah, it's like she's up there being obstinate because she knows she's the boss and she can do what she wants.
And when you turkey hunt, you can do that. You can call in trash talking like a hen does, and to see them just pack up there and leave everybody else and go up the hill and then come back down with her, I can see why birds in the right situation get shot, because they think think it's a hen that needs to join them.
Unless it's Marcus up the hill calling. And
Yeah, that never happens when I'm the hen.
That's when you want to know where they're going. That's my. If you know where they're going, you will kill a turkey. Yeah. That's my motto.
Especially when you call like I do.
And me too.
That's what I'm realizing is sometimes my calling deters them from going where they were going to go. And then sometimes my calling doesn't deter them from going where they want to go, and I happen to be in the way.
I
Yeah.
hear you. Well, I tell you, I've heard some really bad calling on these hens. I mean, you should. I told my husband, I said, I don't feel bad at all because I use my voice a lot because I want to use my hands on the camera. And these hens, there is some of the worst yelping, and the jakes are just, they have some of the most irritating yelps that they do. But the hen, yeah, and they do that to the drumming, the spit and drum.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're hunting and you hear jakes going like that, yelking, calking, there's good chance there might be a gobbler spitting and drumming because
Mhm.
I mean, they're right out in front of me every time he spits and drums. There'll be one jake that just can't stand it. He's got to calc at it.
Mhm.
But they're entertaining.
So when you were describing it a little bit a few minutes ago, but are you going out well before they wake up in the morning and getting in the blind and then not leaving until after they go to bed?
No, I haven't in a couple of 3 years. I used to
Okay.
when when I first started, I I took my yoga mat and I have a big Lucky's blind that is big enough I can stand in, but it's really easy to move. And I would pretty much spend the day, and at that time my mom and dad were alive, and I just called mom and I said, I'm going to stay because they're not far. I wanted to catch that midday
Mm,
behavior, what they do, and see those gobblers come out to feed because they don't eat much. They're like,
yeah.
buck deer. Those gobblers
Mhm.
between 10 and 2 usually are going to be finding something to eat. And I'd have dad drive by and just throw a bag lunch in the window of my blind and leave. And I'd stay. And I've done that in the past. Now I've got a little bit more organized to where I can get in and get out, or have Jolly come and spook the birds really easy, which I say I just need them pushed. If there's
Mhm.
birds around, but I do not try to scare a bird. That's one of my cardinal sins, is to spook birds. I'll stay
Mhm.
if I need to because I don't want them to fly.
Yeah.
That's the
Mhm.
worst thing I can do is get impatient and make birds fly
Yeah.
because that upsets them.
That's kind of what I was thinking is you're obviously getting in there and out of there without
Oh
them
yeah,
knowing.
yeah. When
So
they're
I was curious what you were doing.
Yeah, I sometimes I belly crawl. Sometimes I have to leave everything in the blind and I just belly crawl out and go to the house and then come back after dark. But I get up really early. I get in there an hour before any kind of light, and they're gobbling and waking up 5:50 right now at our place.
Hmm.
You start hearing them um, on a clear morning. It'll be earlier than that. It'll be 5:30. Um,
Mhm.
but
Hmm.
on these cloudy mornings, it's usually about 5:45. So I've got to get in there before 5. You know, when you're out
Hmm.
in the open like that. But it's a challenge and it's fun. It's just like hunting. I mean, I get my turkey fix. People say, "Don't you like turkey hunt anymore?" I said, "Honey, I'm turkey hunting every day." you know, I
I mean,
just
I understand. I'm in it for the behavior and seeing all the
mhm.
everything play out. I I really am fascinated with what they're doing and how they interact with other species, all those sorts of things. I completely can relate.
Yeah. I saw something I've never seen. Jolly and I were up in Tennessee in December, and it was cold, no snow, but super white, thick frost. And on 2 different mornings, there was a group of 8 longbeards. 2 of them would hit the ground and pop into strut and squat in strut with the
Yeah,
tail, the
I saw your
fans up.
pictures
Yeah.
of
And
that.
I
That was
have
remarkable.
something about those 2 birds and the way things were. It was just a gobbler group. And then they eventually got with some hens, but I had never seen them keep that fan up. There was those two, and there was a huge fight going on behind them in the background between some jakes and longbeards, and they'd close their eyes like they were still sleepy. That's what gets me. I mean, they're just it was remarkable to see. It really was. I mean,
We're just
you never
enjoying it.
quit learning. You
Yeah.
just never
Well,
quit.
that's one of the things that's kind of remarkable to me, the amount of time you have spent with turkeys and you're still seeing things you've never seen regularly, it sounds like.
Yeah, that was those two things this year, the breeding poses on there, or the acceptant pose, I don't know what you call them technically, foreplay, whatever. It just that fascinates me. It tells me that each hen is an individual too. You know, they have their own behaviors that they do, but I enjoy it very, very much.
One of the things that Marcus just mentioned was, how much he was talking about how much he enjoys watching turkeys interact with other species. Are there any, memorable instances that you've had watching turkeys interact with other species? I mean, whether it be, a relatively benign interaction with something that's not really a turkey predator, or even, a predator species.
Yeah, I when I'm in food plots, I've got deer usually. You know, in Alabama, we've got deer all the time. The little yearlings or the fawns will interact a lot with those turkeys, and they'll come up there, and we had one, and he's 4.5 years old now. I call him Bully. He's a beautiful white buck. And when he was a fawn, he was chasing turkeys, bulldogging them and I've got pictures of him goosing a hen and chasing gobblers. He just had a thing about turkeys in his food plot. You know, he'd come out in the morning with the mother, the doe, and when the turkeys came in, he was going to start chasing them around. Um, I had a black-phase coyote come out once, but there wasn't really an interaction. There were deer and turkeys, but it came out with a cottontail, a full-grown cottontail in its mouth. So I knew everything was probably going to be okay. And that I videoed it
Were you
because
able to? Okay.
yeah,
I was
I
going to say if you're
videoed it.
able to shoot it.
I videoed it eating that cottontail in 3.5 minutes. It had that full-grown cottontail. It just kind of like crunched it and swallowed it in one piece. It tore a little bit off. The rest of it went down in gulps. It was amazing. And the deer didn't really run. They didn't feel threatened, I guess, because they saw that it had a meal. But that was pretty good. And hawks, I've seen hawks swoop down, and the turkeys, man, they just fan that tail. Have you've seen them run with their tails fanned out and their head way up high? If they do that, usually it's an overhead. You'll see them turn their heads up, looking at the sky. They're very aware of aerial predators. I've photographed a lot of that. I saw turkeys surround a snake on the side of the field. And if you've read Joe Hutto's Illumination in the Flatwoods, he talked about them being very, very curious about snakes. And I even bought a rubber snake, a nice long black one, and did a setup to see if I could get some better shots of it. And it was late in the year last year, so I haven't done it yet. I saved that for another time. I don't do that, but just in the right situation with a bunch of jakes or something. But they surrounded that snake, and their heads were all up, and they're looking. They're very, very curious about a snake. But
that's super fascinating.
Hogs, I haven't seen. I had one hog come in when I had a hen in the field, and I got a picture of both of them in the frame, but that hog had been shot and was really thin and was not aggressive. It was, in fact, I texted Ron, said, you need to bring the rifle back here and shoot this hog, and he did. But deer hate the hogs. They're going to
Mhm.
clear out usually. But
Yeah.
that's the only hog interaction. But I've had hogs come in when I'm photographing turkeys. But
Mhm.
I just
Yeah,
think they probably get out of the way of them.
it seems like that's been my experience with, turkeys and deer relative to, coyotes or other predators or pigs that, they just don't want to be around. It's
Hmm.
like as long as they're out in the open and they can see it from a distance, they're okay.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
It's when that other animal surprises them or they're in close quarters is when they're gonna bolt out of there.
Now I've seen turkeys get really, really alert, and then and deer will do the same thing. And there's something off the field edge, and it ends
Mhm.
up I get a catch a glimpse of a bobcat, a full-grown
Mm.
bobcat, and I think they're very, very aware of bobcats. And I've found hen carcasses that look like they've been plucked, and one biologist told me that that's more than likely it was a bobcat, that they'll pluck them. Find just a
Mm.
lot of feathers and maybe just
Mm-hmm.
the wing tips. Um, our nest predators on our place are raccoons. We
Mhm.
raccoons and possums, and they even find them in those blackberry thickets. That's the
Mhm.
thing. You've got to stay on the predators to keep them under control, just at least during this nesting season.
Mhm.
Just get because they're going to replace. I mean, somebody else is going to come in, but if you can knock them back while they're in that critical period, I really think that's important. And our neighbors, we're cooperate with our neighbors and let each other know what we're trapping and seeing, and that's between hogs and nest predators. And when we're
Mhm.
both hitting them really hard from March, middle February until April, whatever the seasons are in your area, but it's really critical right now because there'll be a void until some others come in. But I think supplemental feeding has made our nest predators more prolific. I've seen raccoons with 5 little ones.
Mm-hmm.
We're putting a table out there. Some people that feed year round. We don't do that. You're feeding
Mhm.
a lot of nest predators, and just they're having more babies, and there's more of them
Mm-hmm.
to find turkey nests.
Yeah.
That's my
Yeah, that's
opinion. Now, I'm not asking you to agree,
Well,
but
we
I really
presented
believe the nest
we've
we
yeah, this
presented
is
for
something that we've talked about a lot. And
Yeah, I know.
and Tess, you were telling me that you and Jolly were had some windshield time recently where you were listening to that episode that we did about, talking about habitat management as predator management and how fire,
Mhm.
tends to push a lot of those nest predators out of the uplands where the hens like to nest. And as a follow up to that, there were a lot of listeners that reached out and asked, what do you think it is that's causing that behavioral response from the predators? And I assumed that it was probably related to food resources, but I wasn't sure. So I went back and I looked up several raccoon, in particular, right, food habit studies, and there were many of them that were done many decades ago, back when there was still really high interest in raccoons as a game species, right? So we were
Right.
looking at
Fur prices.
actually looking then at providing quality raccoon habitat,
Mm-hmm.
which is
Mhm.
interesting to look back on
Yeah.
today. But there were several studies that, and this was, back during an era where there was very little feeding and baiting of wildlife,
Mhm.
and even then you would still see that in several studies corn was the number one food item, both in terms of how many of the coon digestive systems or scats, however they were measuring it, was the number one item that showed up in those. And then when it did show up, it was comprised the majority of the food that had been consumed by weight. And
Wow.
that was really interesting and
Yeah.
revealing to me,
Yeah.
because everybody knows raccoons love corn, but just seeing it quantified like that
Yeah.
made an impression
Absolutely.
on me.
It
Yeah.
was definitely the dominant food item in the raccoon Dutch, diet study
Diet.
that I was involved in Mississippi too.
Hmm.
Yeah. They love it. Um, and if you're putting a lot of corn out for deer, you've probably seen plenty of trail camera photos of how raccoons can shinny up a metal pole
Yeah.
and hang upside down and flip that little spinner and eat corn all night, and there'll be 5 of them underneath under the feeder eating the corn. And you got one guy up there spinning out feed, and the other ones are filling up on corn on the ground. And they're just fat and happy and making a lot of baby coons. So there's a good things to everything, and supplemental feeding is, I have mixed opinions on it. We put it out at times, but we're real careful about never having any feed on the ground left. If there's, if there, I don't want to introduce disease, but the thing that gets me, there's no feeders in the spring, because those hens are, if you're feeding and turkeys are coming to the feeders, it's like Grand Central Station. You've got trails going off to where they're going all spring, and your predators know that. We've had supplemental feeding long enough that I think they've learned it. I mean, I get pictures of coyotes chasing a squirrel up a tree under a feeder. I just think that they've learned that that's a good place to go and start your hunt from, or find something you can ambush nearby. And I think that I can't prove it, but I wonder if it has some effect on your hen mortality and your nest. Making it through is just something following around out, smelling turkey smells.
We don't really know, but it stands to reason that probably does happen.
I have been trying to get that funded because I think it's important.
I think it'd be interesting, really. I don't know if you can. Were you thinking about like putting the GPS on them and tracking them from these supplemental areas to see how many of them live or are successful with their nests, or how would you do that?
Well, there's a couple of things. I think the initial step that I would take is to tag hens and then see how frequently they visit feeders and whether or not that predicts their survival. And then also I am real curious about whether or not they choose to nest near or avoid or are indifferent to a feeder location, and how the distance to feeder affects their nesting success. I mean, Will and I have done the review. We have tried to find the positives and negatives for turkeys, and we don't find much that would suggest a positive effect. I mean, it's pretty much all bad.
Well, and if you keep your predators trapped down and you have supplemental feeding, I think that would help, because they're not visiting that feeder. But that means a really robust trapping program, and you know how much time that takes. I trapped with my dad all the time growing up. That takes a commitment. If you can't hire it done, you've got to figure a way to do your own little part on your own piece of land. And a lot of people are just not big landowners like us. We've got 210 acres. Well, that's a lot to manage for us. And do it the way we really would like to, and just keeping hog traps monitored and the predators trapped down during the season. Not counting everything else you want to do. There's a lot of hours in the day that you devote to just trying to do that part of your management. So it's a labor of love. We all love them, and
I know a lot of folks. A lot of folks tell us that they're like, "Yeah, I feed year round, but I'm always trapping around my feeders, and I don't know. I mean, that just feels a little bit like a Band-Aid,
It's like
rather than treating the root cause,
Well, I don't know. Don't a lot of them not? You're not allowed to keep feeders going. I don't even know we don't run feeders in the spring, so. But I would think just turning them off in the spring could help. Take away the temptation.
Yeah. Well, you can't hunt over them, but I can say from the gobblers that we've collected across Alabama, if you look in the crops, I mean, and this is from, I don't know, it's close to 900 birds.
Mm-hmm.
About, and keep in mind that a lot of those birds are killed shortly after they fly down. And like you were talking about earlier, they're not going to eat much until, like 10 o'clock in the morning once all the excitement dies down and they're just kind of loafing. So keep in mind that a lot of the birds that we processed and looked through their crop contents of had not even eaten anything.
Right.
And we still saw that about 10% of birds had corn in their crops during the hunting season.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of corn still going out during that
Oh
time of
yeah,
year too.
yeah. I'm sure there is.
What percentage didn't have anything in their crop, Will?
I don't know. We just decided the other day that we were gonna look at it that way, but I haven't heard back, from the
Okay.
grad students.
Mm-hmm.
The afternoon
Well,
birds that you shoot are the most interesting in the crops because they've had a chance to feed, and I
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
have found some, pretty interesting stuff. Those empty crops in the morning, of course, I want to look at everything when I
Right.
get around one, but um, this one bird I laid it all out on a stump because he did a smorgasbord that day, but and it was a little bit later in the season, so he was not strutting and breeding. He was hanging out trying to find a lone hen, coming in. But he had 60 roly polies in him and little tiny, looks like slugs or something. And he had like 44 water oak acorns and some various
Mm-hmm.
grasses and leaves and some other bugs. And it was pretty cool. But he found him a nice little spot of roly polies. That was
Yeah,
pretty neat.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, this has been fascinating conversation, but one life stage we haven't really talked any about, and I know that you have
Mm-hmm.
filmed a lot of it because I admire your photos of poults. So I'm just curious, do you have any stories about poults or anything that has stuck out to you that people could learn from?
I have, I've that's one phase it's hard to do. It's hot weather,
Yeah.
and I can tell you you've got to really want to do it to go in June and sit in a
Mm-hmm.
clover field in the sunlight and wait for those mamas to bring those poults out. But I had a pretty good opportunity 2 years ago on a place in Macon County, and um, I that's where I really have developed a respect for these hens and what they go through. I mean, they're 3 months out of the year, something could kill them at any moment and get their clutch and all. But the poults, um, the hens are so wary, so alert when they've got the little ones. And these were just getting able to go up into the low hanging limbs and bushes and all. They were small,
Mm-hmm.
and they're amazing to watch because they watch the hen and they try to do what she does, but they fight. And they're little guys like this, and they're already strutting and
Yeah.
pulling. I mean, they're grabbing the sides of their faces and pulling them down. And you've got some of them that are just real bullies. But I'll tell you what was probably the neatest thing I saw about poults, and when they're just getting ready to get off the ground, is they do their flutter flying. They do all this little flutter flying as they're developing, I guess, that first 3 weeks, getting strengthening and all that. But that hen, there were two hens with, gosh, they had like 16 little ones between them. They were just little quail size, not about, and they fed all over in the clover all around me. Um, but when it got time to go to roost, the one hen walked through and it was pretty grassy stuff. She walked down the field line with her poults following her, and she stood where a water oak low limb came almost all foot from the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And she stood there and stood there. And then until they all got right there underneath her, and she flew up to the trunk. I couldn't see where she landed, but it just went right up about probably 8 or 10 feet off the ground where it joined the trunk. And one by one, those little guys fluttered up onto that low-hanging limb and walked, and I shot photos of them walking that limb up to
That's
her.
amazing.
And I think she did that on purpose. I mean, she knew
That's
that
what I was
one
thinking.
low-hanging limb, that was the only one along that edge for about 100 yards that hung low to the ground, and she took those little ones knowing that would be easier, to get up off the ground. And I went back, I got up at 3 o'clock the next morning because I was hoping I could catch them coming down the limb. And anyway, they got up and I could see her and I could she actually went up probably 25 feet. I could see her up there, but I don't know if they, when they flew down the next morning, they just like dropped down in out of sight. It was fairly early and they didn't flutter out into the field, which looking back, it was kind of dumb of me to think I was going to see these little guys sail out into the field. They were just kind of like, okay, I'm going to jump off this limb and wherever I land, I land.
Just
But
flutter my way down.
yeah,
I'm kind of fluffy, so
yeah, they
it'll probably work
bounce when
out.
yeah. But it was really neat to watch those little ones get up off the ground. And then the next day, they went into the timber and they preened on some low bushes in the afternoon rather than on the ground. So they were, I think they
Like she was
start trying to
teaching
get up pretty early
Mhm.
they have that
teaching them to get in the-
instinct
Yeah.
to go up. But I was able to at least document that, that they walk up that limb going up to go to roost with the mama. But that's pretty neat. I've never I've photographed one hen that had little newly hatched. They were just little bitty things, but just one opportunity, and she was taking them through some low grass and all. But and they're not near as fragile as a little quail. It's like a little puffball.
Yeah.
But turkey poults, it's amazing. All your ground birds, baby ones, even can make it through the grass and stuff.
It really is like a miracle that
it is, and it's
not any of them make it.
Yeah, it makes you realize you've really got to make the ground ready and open enough for those little guys to move. And that goes back to
Absolutely.
what you guys preach and know know a lot about is habitat, is burning and trying to get those openings, that canopy underneath there. Because a photographer friend of mine told me once, he said, get down on the ground and look, and you'll see what a turkey sees. And I think everybody that loves a turkey ought to lay down on the ground and look at their property at the various seasons and see what a turkey sees. And
I couldn't agree more.
It's just do it. Get on your belly. Get head high to a turkey and think, can I walk through that?
Yeah.
I've done some amateur photography where I just turned my phone upside down so that the camera is right by the ground.
Yeah.
But a lot of people have told me how much they appreciate being able to visualize what the structure I'm trying to tell them to try to create. That viewpoint has really changed the, how people take in that information and use it. So I completely understand what you're saying.
It's like a light bulb goes off. It's like, man, I never thought this is trashy looking down here. I need to burn. I need to.
What if I was 1 inch tall? I would not like this.
Yeah.
Think about a baby quail. It just amazes me. God if you don't believe in God, you need to go follow some quail and turkeys around because he made it. And that's one thing about photographing turkeys and hunting too is, creation is what he put here for us to manage. We're to have dominion over the creatures, and that, to me, that's a call to conservation. It's a message. And when you're in nature, it's him. And that iridescence on a turkey or even just a hen is a beautiful creature in her own right. She is this Turkeys for Tomorrow organization, that's their theme this year is Year of the Hen. We
Year of
got
the
to
Hen.
make people or let people know that they've got a hard job. They've got a big
Mhm.
burden, and there's so many things we can all do to help them. So,
Mhm.
and what you all do really does this habitat
Yeah.
management and just all of the research. It's just, um, I love the awakening that's out there among turkey hunters. You probably have
Absolutely.
felt it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I go to these
Absolutely.
banquets and people are like, man, we like this as much as hunting, you know?
Yeah.
Mhm.
I think that's the one good thing that technology and the connectedness that we have nowadays has brought us is it's
Hmm.
helped catalyze this, this movement and kind of
Mhm.
organizing people
Yeah. And,
No
to
doubt.
work
and
towards a common goal.
your contribution with this podcast is so critical because like with Turkeys for Tomorrow, we can direct people to the podcast hunters that can learn more, and you speak in the language that we can all as lay people understand. And I think that connectivity with the researchers has been. I've never felt that in the past.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You read your agency magazines and things like that. I'm not saying that there wasn't information there, but this is personalized it with social
Mhm.
media. These people
Mhm.
know you. They love what you do. I know that probably you get inundated with questions and all, but you're serving a great being of great service to the wild turkey. That's what way I feel about it.
Well, I certainly appreciate you saying that, and I hope that's what we hope to do. So
Oh,
we,
I think you all have done well with this podcast.
well, we've
It
certainly
has
been trying.
you've done a great job. It's been well received, I think.
We appreciate that. Marcus, I know you got to run in a couple minutes. So I just wanted to make sure that Tess, if there was anything else that you wanted to share, that you haven't got a chance to yet, that we left a couple minutes for you to do that.
Now, all I would say is just to listeners to just keep listening to this podcast and just know that there's going to be new research, coming out, and anything. For me, the observations of people in the field are important to you all as well, and
Hmm.
I think it's really good that
Hmm.
we have an outlet now that where we can say, I saw this. What does this mean? Or I've got this problem with turkeys or whatever. I think
Hmm.
um, this is just really important with some of the declines that we've seen in turkey populations over the last 6, 8 years. That the time is now, and it's just refreshing to see everybody pulling together. And that's one thing we want to do is keep the hunting community together, the nature loving community, people whether they hunt or not, but they love to watch turkeys. We just we can all find common ground to see what we can do and help
Yeah.
our neighbors.
Yeah. Well,
Absolutely.
that's one thing I really appreciated about you, Tess, other than the absolutely beautiful photography, is you clearly have loved the resource and passionate about it, and have
Mhm.
continued that on for a long time, and we really appreciate that.
It's inspiring.
Yeah.
It inspires me. And I think it inspires a lot of people too.
Yeah, and I think
Well,
that's what we really need to harness and catalyze. Is you know we have a really passionate group of people that really care about this, and if we
yeah,
can make sure we point that passion in the right direction, then great. It's going to be great for turkeys.
it will, and I never get tired of being out there. You'd think after 25 years, but you
Yeah,
just never get tired of it. And I'm
the
glad you
dedication
all
is
are the next
impressive.
generation coming to carry it on.
Yeah,
I'm going to plan to be out there as long as good Lord lets me.
yeah,
But
And we
thank
hope
you
that's
very
a
much.
lot longer.
yeah.
I appreciate it very,
Well,
very
Marcus, you
much.
go do your thing, and we're going to stay here, and we're going to keep talking turkeys with Tess. I'm sorry, but
You be my guest.
We
Yeah,
won't talk
I
about
really
you.
wish. Well, that's good. I mean, I could sit here and listen to you tell me all the really amazing things you've seen. I wish I could for hours. But
I've got a book in me, but I haven't got the time to write it yet. I just hope I can get to that before I die.
Yeah. Well,
I'm happy to help.
I need to dictate it to somebody.
There you go. Well, maybe we could just have you dictate it on here. We'll just have you back for each chapter.
There you go.
Oh, that would be perfect.
That would be one thing I would dream. One of my bucket list items is to try to leave some of this behind that I've seen and compile it all. I have a lot of it, but I just haven't compiled it because I want to be out there with my camera.
Mm-hmm.
That's the hard part.
Yeah. Well, we sure appreciate that you're doing it, and I appreciate you, spreading the word about turkeys and passion.
You bet. We're all in the same focus. We just keep going forward with them. Thank you very much.
We appreciate it. Wild Turkey Science is part of the Natural Resources University podcast network and is made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow, a grassroots organization dedicated to the wild turkey. To learn more about TFT, check out turkeysfortomorrow.org.